All right, so a few weeks ago, I was on Netflix and I was just cruising through all the thumbnails, and there was this documentary there. It was called Hot Girls Wanted, and I clicked on it. And, it was probably, at least in part because of the saucy thumbnail, I thought I was going to learn something about the sex industry. But it dragged me into this world that I really don't have much background in, and I was frankly shocked by what I came across.
It didn't hit me until I got on the plane.
It followed the stories of three 18 and 19-year-old women who'd answered ads on Craigslist and sort of got pulled into the porn industry, where at first it was maybe what their expectations were. They were going to have sex on camera, they were going to get some money, and it would go on from there. But the thing about the porn industry, at least at that time, was that, you had to make a 3-month shelf life.
Shelf life of a girl? Best case scenario, a year tops.
The porn industry wanted new faces, and if you wanted to make a living, at least the way they portrayed it, you got involved in increasingly violent and even degrading acts. There's this whole genre of pornography called abuse porn, and it's what it sounds like. It's not stuff that is for the faint of heart.
Your ass, bro.
Oh, today was just so horrible though.
Oh, you still got it done.
Still got it done.
But according to the Kinsey Institute, it's 40% of the pornography that's posted online fits this category. And the girls in this documentary were on the fast train into the belly of that beast.
That last part, I hated.
I was terrified.
And so all of that, it's a long way for me to introduce my guest today, whose name is Rachel Bernard. She was one of the leads in that now almost 10-year-old documentary where she appeared under the pseudonym Ava Taylor. Now, in the film's epilogue, Bernard and the rest of the girls all decide to leave the industry and remake their lives at home. And according to an ABC News report that came out in the sort of the promotional bit afterwards, Bernard since chose to become an advocate for women and pursued a career as a photographer. But all of those news reports and things, they happened 10 years ago. And I wanted to know what the girls were doing now. So I tracked down Rachel through a series of Google searches, and she agreed to sit down with me. And I am really interested to talk to her because there was a bit of controversy around the documentary with allegations that, well, maybe it didn't portray reality as it really was. So Rachel, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
After the documentary came out, there were prominent voices in the sex-positive industry, notably like Mistress Matisse, who said that the documentary and the TV show that followed it portrayed this in a way that was very misleading, and that there was an agenda to demonize sex work and sort of on-air performers. Now, how fair would you say was the depiction of the pornography industry in Hot Girls Wanted?
Well, while it was happening, it was obviously disorienting for me to even know, what I'm doing. What I can say is that I was very honest when the people were there recording me, and I didn't know what would be portrayed 2 years later on the next Netflix documentary. So I think that what they were capturing was something similar to a situation that is only maybe, one facet of what this really, really complex, super in-depth industry really looks like. And I think that a lot of the people who did have big voices and who were extremely successful in the industry had a version of the industry that worked for them. And I believe that they were completely right and very, dignified in talking about what their experience was too. Because if I had the choice, 2 years down the road to say what I believed in my experience and what it was for me, or had I been older enough to understand what was even happening, I probably would have taken the same side as them, because they were successful and it was working for them. And they were, they were 10% or maybe 15% of what really happens in the industry. But I do think that there was, there is voices that didn't experience like these, like, big grand opportunities in the industry, who probably did feel a bit spoken for with the documentary. And for me, I thought that I was fighting for those people, because I also thought that those people were myself, even though it wasn't myself by the time that the documentary came out. So I was thinking I was coming from a humanitarian place, all the while, I was kind of just being spoon fed, talking topics. And that was my own lesson to learn later on. But I agree with them. I think they were villainizing the industry.
It's interesting. When you were being filmed here, I'm just trying to put myself in an 18-year-old's mindset, right?
Yeah.
And who's someone who wants to work in this industry.
Yeah.
You actually had two camera teams following you around
Right.
at once, right? There was a
Yeah.
camera team that was documenting your life story, and
Mhm.
there was also you sort of acting in these scenes, and that
Right.
must have been a bizarre experience. It's sort of like meta. You're like living almost the nostalgia of your own life at that time. What was it
Yes.
like to sort of just experience that?
Well, that's the crazy part, because for me, my entire goal going into the industry, it really wasn't to explore my sexuality. I didn't, if anything, like before I went there, I was very much like a scared, anxious, like prude type of person. And my goal in going was to find a route into life, like into experiences, into something that could show me more than my small, like very closed off town. My Catholic upbringing, I was completely bored of everything in my life. And I think I just needed like a sensory overload. And that was just somehow, it just happened. I can't explain how it did. But I went there looking for more than I think the average person would, because I didn't want to stay in the industry. I wanted to be able to find my way out into some networking possibility, because so many people were, you would come across tons and tons of people in this place, and even just traveling by yourself in general. So when I went down there, and within like the first, gosh, I would say month that I was down there, my timelines are so hazy. All of a sudden, there was women pulling up, talking about a documentary. This was still kind of like, early generations of like Netflix and streaming. So we were like, oh my gosh, like, who are these people? They didn't mention Netflix at first. They came up in a very old car with an old camera. So we were like, oh, these must be just like, you know, hobbyist filmmakers. And we thought that was even cooler. We were like, wow. So like people, the moment that I was doing what I intended to, I got out of my town, like, look at, immediately we have more people looking at us and wanting to hear about us. So to me, it was nice. I thought that it was cool. And that's why I was like really honest with them, really open with them. I ended up like trying to create friendships with them, because they presented as really nice women. So to me, it was better. It made me feel almost like safe, knowing like there was another side to, what was going on.
I imagine, I've dealt with Netflix quite a few times,
Yeah.
and some various other streamers. And, obviously as the viewer's experience is like, oh, I'm watching a documentary that happens right now. But obviously it takes like 2 years for the doc to get out, and like
Yes.
another 2 years to even get it greenlit.
Mhm.
And but at what point in that process did they meet you? Because obviously when they imagined this, you were like 15, right? Yeah,
Yeah, which is absolutely insane to even think about. I've never thought about that before, but, yeah, that's what's weird about it. To me, when they rolled up, on our 2 East Drive, they seemed like just the newest, most green documentarians. Like, I've never been in any film industry. I turned 18 in June, and I was in Miami in November. So if that gives you any insight into how young I was, I had no idea. But for them, I I I know that they met me in the absolute beginning of my entire story. They followed me throughout maybe 50% of it. And then would check in like here and there. But by the time the documentary actually came out and they were asking me to come to Indiana University to see the screening for it, I was like, okay. And so much had happened from me being a nubile or a super amateur person in Miami. I got the lucky 10% slice, if it might be less than 10%, of someone who found success in the industry, someone who very much was already going and networking my way into places, because I would always start picking up the camera. I wanted to start turning into, either the director or the filmmakers. I wanted to move my way into the creative space rather than having to, continue in the pornography side of it. So I was having a great time. I was meeting so many people. I had like built my way up to where I got to start making choices. I didn't have to do the abuse stuff. I didn't have to go do BDSM. I didn't have to go, do things against my will. I got to choose because I was lucky, basically. So then by the time the documentary came out, I was literally, they rushed me down to Indianapolis. Me and my friend were driving there late. We get in, they rush me, and I sit down and I just watch, this documentary about how horrendous and how terrible everything I experienced was. And I was like, wait, whoa, like this isn't necessarily what I thought. I didn't know that they were going to be on one side or the other. I thought this was neutrally showing what was going on. I didn't know that all of a sudden I became like the spokesperson for the horrors of the industry, because I didn't sign up for that.
As I recall, at the end of the documentary, you get like these one-liners, like "Where are they now?" sort of things. And
Yeah, of course.
if I recall correctly, your one-liner was, I think you were Ava at that point, but Ava has left the industry and is going to become a documentary filmmaker behind the camera. So, but it sounds like you are still in the industry. So are you saying this is inaccurate? What is?
Well, it was. Well, because really in the whole, so they recorded, I was in it for some of it, but the other girl, Tressa or Stella, like they were really following her. I was not going to bring these filmmakers to my hometown. They were not going to meet my parents. That was just never going to happen for me. So they kind of
And
latched
that
onto
was
her.
so hard. That was so hard to watch, like, because it from a documentary perspective, it's amazing they had that footage, because I was riveted while watching this.
So tell them like your parents are gonna find out.
Right. And that's why I'm like, this should have been, she should have started being the spokesperson for it, because she really like, she had to go through it with them coming all the way into her real life. And then her having to like feel the pain of being pulled out of the industry without her wanting to get out of it. She didn't want to stop. Like she didn't know, like that's what the story really was about. But then with me, I was that amateur, and then I kept finding my own way and like doing more and more, and like being more of my own voice, having more, wit about me. But by the time the documentary came out, it was basically too late, because they sat me down basically right after I watched the documentary. I realized, oh shit, like this is anti-porn. I was like, oh shit, I'm still doing this. Like I'm actually being pretty successful. Like, and now I'm here. And then right after we watched the documentary, they pulled me up on stage and we had to do a panel about it. And I didn't know this. They didn't train me. They didn't like say, here's some questions, here's some this is what they're going to talk about. All of a sudden I had to be the person who I was, a couple like years before, answering questions about something that I didn't even have a chance to digest or think about. So that was super jarring for me. And then right after that, I'm in the car with the filmmakers and my friend, and they just turn around. They're like, so you're going to quit now, right? And I'm like, what? I was like, what? And I had no idea what else to say. I was like, yeah, like I didn't know. This is all at Indiana University. And so I'm not even 21 yet. And this is actually right on my 20th birthday, I'm there. Rashida Jones is there. Like, they're blinding me with star power. Like, all these like very influential people and academics and film, and all of this stuff is happening around me. So I'm like getting starstruck. I'm feeling like, whoa, like I could switch this into very real like work. Like, I could really help beyond like what I thought I was doing before. I could really do this, but I have to quit what I'm doing. I have to fully like stop everything. I can't use my networking capabilities anymore. I can't travel to these places anymore. The industry is definitely going to vilify me when they think that I'm doing this, on purpose, even though that wasn't my choice. So they sat me down at dinner with this long table. I have a picture of all of us like sitting, Rashida Jones right next to me, like all these high up people. And I was like, woo, happy birthday to me. And they're like, so, if you, decide to like quit and like whatever, like we'll pay for your school. And I was like, what? Like, what do you mean? Because really, like, this was a big thing for me. Like, I was in the industry trying to make money because I didn't get money for school. Like, I didn't have any other opportunities. So that's what I was out there looking for, was opportunity. And so them offering me school, I was like, oh my God, like this just made all my wildest dreams come true. I can go to art school. I can pursue photography. I can like be a voice, for people who really might need it and didn't get the opportunity. It just seemed like every single box was like checked. I was like, this is fantastic. And then, they whisked me away to New York, and I was doing ABC, and I was like having more and more like media. And then I applied to school, I got accepted, and then like everything got really like quiet. And I was like, okay, well, whatever. They're paying for my school. They don't need me anymore. I don't need them, as long as they just keep paying for my school. And I guess that I wasn't like, being, I don't know, they would monitor my social media. They would like look at what I did. They would text me and say like, like maybe you should take this down. Or, they would like make sure that I was acting how they would want me to be acting. And I think when it got to a point when they realized like I was just going to be myself, they just took away the school. They stopped paying for my school. I got to go to a 1 year, and I was doing great. I wasn't failing. I wasn't, just doing whatever I wanted still. Like, I was really locked in, going to school every morning, 6 a.m. And they just took it away from me and gave me nothing else. And I couldn't return back
Where
to
were
the
you?
industry.
What school were you at?
I was going to the Art Institute in Chicago. So I was commuting from my
Great
town
school.
out here. Yeah, and I was loving it. I was seriously like visualizing how my life would go. And I was like, wow, this was why everything happened. Like, they really did help me. And
So that's
I
interesting. That's so when I'm a journalist, been doing this for
yeah,
24 years,
yeah.
roughly. Wow, I'm very
Hmm.
old. And
Stop.
one of the things that we don't do in journalism is pay sources. And it sounds like they paid quite a bit of money for a school. I don't know what art institute costs, but it's probably like 50 grand a year or something like that.
Oh
And
yeah. I was going
and
to take on a lot of loans.
and there is an ethical thing about giving a source remuneration to perform on screen, because you're sort of
Yes.
influencing them, and the payment that they're giving you is actually after the fact. But it also
Yep.
sounds like it was still quid pro quo, meaning that you still
Yep.
had to be their spokesperson.
Yep.
Um,
But they didn't tell me any of that. If they would have been like, hey, like on the conditions that you follow our rules and that you look like this for us, then fine. But they didn't really want to pay for my school. They wanted to use me until the media and the press wore down and get their little like next thing off, which was their series and this, that, and the other. And really, when I started looking deeper and deeper and deeper, the people who were putting on this thing, the Harnish Foundation, I track that back to it just being like people right wing. Her husband Jill Harnish is a hedge fund manager in New York. Like, these people just had agendas. They had political agendas, and really what they wanted to do was press anti-pornography. They wanted to Christianize America. I mean, we see this every day now. And they used me. They used me just as badly as they they were claiming the industry was using me, but at least in the industry I had a fucking choice. I'm sorry for swearing. At least I had a choice, but they just duped me under the false pretense that like, look, you're meeting Rashida Jones. Look, you're this good person. You're on the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. Like you're doing all these things. But the moment that it was not serving them and their idea anymore, they literally took it away from me and did not care what happened to me, because I was going to support myself no matter what, in the industry, not in the industry, no matter what I was going to fall into. I'm just a resourceful person, and they got me because I believed them. And after that, I had to go back to working minimum wage. And after that, 2020 happened and everything got flipped on its head, and I found spirituality, and I teach yoga and I do Reiki, and I'm glad that it all happened the way that it did, but I wasn't going to like sleep soundly without at least saying my side of the story.
This is totally fascinating, and there's so many questions I have as a journalist. Like, I was having a conversation a few months ago with I'm sort of working on a documentary with a streaming service right now, and the conversations that I have as a journalist with the documentarian that is opposite me, so they're filming and I'm sort of talking with them, and is like, I said, oh, there's a journalistic ethic here that I need to adhere to, and they're like, but we're documentarians, we don't have those ethics, and I'm like, mind blown, because I think that it's not that it's zero, it's different. There's a different understanding. There's different
it's zero to the person that they're like dealing with. Like, I feel like they didn't give me any truth in the same way that they were trying to like illuminate all of this terrible stuff about, and even like the documentary itself. Okay, so the issue is all of these horrible things. Look at this abuse porn. Look at this poor young girl, blah, blah, blah. Let's follow her home. Why aren't they following the men home and being like, hey, why are you doing this to young, unassuming women? Like, why do you find it pleasurable in pain to see pain? Like, yes, we're naive. There's your answer. We're young. There's your answer. We're from backgrounds that didn't give us a ton of money to survive. So there's your answer. There's no questions here. The porn industry can be bad, and it can also not be bad. There's like duality in everything. It's just like how you do it yourself.
Let's go into it's funny, I have a list of like 20 questions or 15 questions to ask you, and we're at question 1 right now, because I don't know where this is going to go, Rachel. But let me ask you the second question on my list, which I think goes to exactly what you were saying. When they flashed these statistics on the screen, which are frankly horrifying, right? Because there is this abuse porn, and when I look at the abuse porn, there's also this sort of like another scene in the film where there's sort of like an older man and a younger lady. It was supposed to be sort of like almost pedophilia. It's really gross for me to watch, but it's also clear that these people are acting. So when you see the camera on it, you see the actors like saying, we're going to go over our lines here. And then there's the fantasy of what's actually going on the screen. But one of the things that the Kinsey Institute put out was that 40% of total porn, and I don't know if that's total porn consumption or total porn, but I think it's like the number of videos on the sites depict violence towards women. What do you think about this statistic?
Well, I'm not surprised that it's that high. I also wouldn't be surprised if it was higher. I think that, now I'm talking about, let me just be clear. I'm talking about something that I knew 10 years ago. I don't know the state of the industry right now. I have not, witnessed what like what all these companies are doing anymore. And I know that we've gone through a big change in just everything really since the pandemic. But for me, when I was there, the part that really like decided, if you were gonna like succeed or really like go down a bad path, like with all of it, was like what you end up falling into. Because, obviously the pull and like the drive for money is the number one thing, at least for me. And really it would just be your gauge is like, how much are you willing to do? But the sad part is that like, that's what the entire thing is about, is kind of like this exploitation, like this, what are you willing to do for money? And, you know, I don't really know the psychology of why people like would want to see this, but it's more, it shows more about the people and the consumers who are looking for this, that like for how much it is prevalent in what you can see. And I think just in general, this is like the industry is a microcosm of, you know, society. And I think that women, of course, you know, this is just like a domination thing. Like people like will always skew this way. And I think that the industry did make it easier for companies to be able to get away with doing things like this under the guise that it's acting, but it's not really acting. I mean, it's real. You're getting pain inflicted on you in real ways. You're getting really like spoken to in the ways that they speak to you. Like that stuff is reality. And then it's really left on the woman to either compartmentalize it, you know, to cope with it in the ways that she copes with it, or for some people, like maybe it's empowering. I just don't know. It's different for every single woman, but I think that it be the choice to know what you're getting yourself into first, which they don't always give you that choice.
It was really, I mean, honestly, it was painful to watch it on that documentary because, you know,
Yeah.
that I am very aware of porn. I am a male. I have been on porn sites. Like it's pretty common for that to occur, right? But this is sort of a niche, even though it might be a giant niche that I'm just not very familiar with. And to see it, and also to think that a person's going through it, and there's like sort of this duality going on. One, these are lines, you're being paid, and the other actor's being paid, and everyone's sort of in on the frame of a script, and yet at the same time, it's also real. And I would think that it took a toll on me watching just the sort of PG-13 shots that they had in that documentary. How is it for the someone who was actually acting in that?
Well, you know, 10 years later, I'll just keep saying that. Like 10 years later, I,
Mhm.
you know, have for some time in my life, I was like, this didn't affect me. I'm good. I can just block, block, block. That was a mechanism, of course. And, you know, especially with all this new work that I found myself in, a lot of like spirituality and inner stuff. You know, I just realized that, you know, trauma stays within the body, and it did follow me. It did affect me. It did. There's still things that I'm like having to realize like were products of my situation all the way back then. Thinking that it didn't affect me was definitely, you know, a very half-assed way of like dealing with something. And you know, had I had some hindsight, or like had known if I was older, maybe I would have been more capable of deciphering what was going on around me. But it very much felt like, you know, you have to do this, you're here, everyone's here. You won't get paid if you don't. So you might as well just do it, get it over with, because most of the time all you were thinking about was it ending, like just it being over. So as a woman, you know, you can experience really hard things and somehow just, you know, block it out. But the last couple years have been about me just realizing that it's not worth blocking out. It's just worth dealing with. And so it's definitely, it does affect you, but it didn't destroy me. So there's kind of two parts of it, you know?
I think that's a really good point. Like a lot of times, you know, people can go through all sorts of traumatic experiences. I think we live in a
Mhm.
world now where everything is sort of through a lens of trauma. But
Totally.
it's funny. There was I was listening to a Dr. Mike video recently
Yeah.
where he was talking about the roots of trauma, where he was
Hmm.
saying that he went through traumatic experiences as a kid that if you just told them on a screen, you'd be like, oh my God, that destroyed you. And he was like, actually, I ended up being fine. Like, it wasn't like what you think is going to happen, but people can be resilient even if the depiction of something is not necessarily destroying you. And I think that we want that sensationalism.
And that's the thing that I think that they were saying, like, look, these people are going to be irreparable. They're going to be garbage after this, basically. Like, they're like the whole entire notion is like, oh, so you were once a woman in porn, like you're never going to get married, you're never going to have kids, you're going to be just like this, like out of your mind person your whole life. They just get a very like stereotypical image of a person who could ever fathom doing that. And now I can't even really describe the reason as to why, like, or how my brain like let me be in those places at that time. But from like all of the full circle things, like I had to be at those. I had to be there. Otherwise I wouldn't have found the depth in myself. I wouldn't have had the awakening, like the spiritual like guidance that I've come across to say, like, you had to go through horrible shit to be able to help other people with their horrible shit. And that's just like life. There's no one person that doesn't go through something traumatic or something horrible and have to figure out the reason as to why. And so for me, there's still like the bigger reason as to why that I don't know if I've totally figured out yet, but I do know that as equally as bad as something can be, it can be just as good. So that's how I feel about this whole experience, honestly.
What would you say that your experience working in this industry, have your opinion, how did it frame your opinions about men in the world?
Hmm. Well, that's a tough one. I I definitely That's a tough one. I was raised Catholic, so you're really raised to like be male serving, male pleasing, male gaze pleasing, beautiful. Like you're meant to just really like serve this male attitude, basically. And so all of my life, that's where I was coming from. Like, how do I please the men that are around me? And it's like cringy and horrible and embarrassing, but that was the place that I was coming from. So I was like, maybe if I can like, be hot, get paid for it, like do this, like, wow, whoa, like this is like something like I was doing it really for approval and validation in a lot of things. But then as time has worn on, I'm just realizing that anybody, out there, one who would like consume something horrible like that goes into like one sense, and those people like I just can't agree with. But also I've realized like there's really like amazing men out there that do not like put their shit like this onto women. And like for one, my fiance, like he was a person I also didn't think that I'd be cut out for a relationship. I also thought that I was always going to be, in horrible situations and all of these things. But like he was a person who never judged me for anything that I went through. He was a person who would never bring it up in any regard to degrade me or to make me feel bad about it. He was a person who was like able to say like, wow, you're way stronger than I could ever imagine myself being for going through something like that. So like to where I'm like, wow, there's a lot of disgusting men, and especially like predatory men who, feast on whether it's like the women in the industry or on pornography itself. They have their own things that they're going to have to deal with down the line, and karma will do its thing on that. But also, not every man is that way. And for me, it's really like been super awakening to like not have to do anything to satisfy or please any man, besides the ones that really like help me and care about me. So that it's definitely like opened up a huge like facet of my life where I'm like, wow, it just doesn't, nothing has to be for anybody but myself.
All right, I'm gonna keep this short. These videos are intensely difficult to produce, often pitting me and my tiny little media company against billion-dollar companies that want to shut me down for good. Like the time that AG1 hired the most expensive legal team in America to threaten me so that I'd take down a video that exposed its crooked founder. So far, it hasn't worked. Instead, my channel has blown up, going from 30,000 subscribers to almost 65,000 in just a few weeks. And this is where you come in to help me out. I'm doing my best work on Substack right now, and if you subscribe there, not only will you get my occasional newsletters, but premium members will also get access to my videos before anyone else even sees them. I'd love you to consider joining that gang and helping me hold truth to power. So let's hit that like and subscribe button and keep this channel growing. Without further ado, back to our regularly scheduled program. Yeah, I was watching the follow-up to Hot Girls Wanted, the documentary, which is a TV series called something else, Hot Girls Wanted, and then there was like internet edition. I forget. It was like another. It was the follow-up to it, and in it there was one of these scenes where a woman who is very similar to you gets brought into the porn industry by a recruiter, and then she sort of like goes off the deep end and gets into drugs and is pushed to do not only sort of more extreme pornography, but also it looks like she's moving into the escorting side of things. Is there in the industry a constant pressure to escalate in that direction?
For me, in my experience, I would say yes. I think that, when any industry can see, a person who's willing to kind of push themselves to the extreme, and especially in an industry where like there's a ton of money involved, everyone is always looking to get their piece of it. And whether that is like a man and wife who have been like mistress madams, in Burbank, California, looking so normal on the outside, but they just, will like connect like these young girls with men, like then that will be happening. Like if it's that the producers of the company who aren't really in any of the day-to-day mingling, like, but they want like their little slice of it, and they just offer money to them, like to an actress or a person like on the side, like that will happen too. Like really, like there's cracks in all of the foundations, and if there's anyone who is seeking opportunity, looking for money or pleasure, they will find their way in all of it. And really it's just up to you as like the person. I was gonna say woman, but I wouldn't say that I was a woman at this time. You as the person to decipher once again what you're willing to do, because there will always be like pressure as for more, but that's where it can always go toxic, where if you can't handle it mentally, or if you can't, if you already have mental illness, or addictions, then you can go down that route. And that's the most unfortunate and the saddest, route to see. Or you have people fall off the face of the earth. You just don't know what happens to them. Or, they do something like me. I can't really, say what that was. Or they become successful because they were able to, keep their wits about them and handle what they could handle and say yes to things, say no to things, and kind of find balance in it. So yes, the pressure is always there, but it does come down to you. There's definitely like people who will sneak or slide their way into it. But a lot of that like other stuff is pretty upfront and in your face, and they're pretty open with what it is you're getting yourself into, because they're business people, no matter how nuanced and wild, the sex work and sex industry is. Like they're business people, and they will find a way to make their own money. And there's nothing that will stop them in doing that.
Sure. I want to ask a question about sort of the changing nature of that industry. In journalism, we went from like big companies like the New York Times or Wired magazine or whoever, who were, had a lot of money, had a lot of resources, and they've sort of all fallen apart in a similar way to the porn industry. It used to be, I don't know the names of the companies, but there were like people who put out DVDs and made a lot of money. And then it seemed to have, it has fractured, where then we've sort of like dripped down into sort of more niche content, more sort of social media style. And, I went from a writer for the mainstream magazines into someone doing something on YouTube. And it seems like we're seeing the same thing here in this industry. So there's two questions. One is, do porn stars, the last one I can remember is like Jenna Jameson. She comes to my mind. Like, it's like someone who has had like name brand, everyone has heard of this person. Do they still exist, or is it sort of the same thing? Like it's filtering down to niches.
That's the thing. Like, I can't necessarily say because I am not a follower of the industry at all anymore. I've really, I've fallen into my own pocket of life, and it's been quiet for me on that side. Um, I would say that they definitely do exist, and they do well, I'm sure. But what's beautiful about now as compared to back then was like you could only like drive and find the success in like the ground, the grassroots of like the dirt beginnings of like Miami's and Vegas's, like, that type of stuff, model houses, whatever. And now you don't have to start there. You don't have to start there at all. You can actually just start from your bedroom and never leave your bedroom. Like you can start from anything. You can have two jobs. You can work anywhere. You can work at Starbucks and do that. Like you can, and it's a little bit more socially acceptable, I think, too, in a way. Of course, you will still get cast, people's opinions on you no matter what you do. But I think it's different as to the way that you don't have to start there. But I think the biggest, most prolific, those names, like they did have to start in a more traditional way. So anyone who is like large and in charge now has probably done this for over a decade, I'd say, at least, and has found a way to not make it their entire life. They might like still have this name and this image, but they also do several other things. Like Lisa Ann, she's like a writer and like a sports journalist. And then you have my friend Carter, who turned into a total like traveling, touring DJ. She's like amazing. There's like people who like do it and are household names, but they were able to leverage being a household name into doing other things. Just like, anybody who once was a journalist and like moved their way into media and like became their own face of their own brand, of their own thing. We're going less from like these big houses of stuff to like independent rooms of people doing their own thing, which I fully support. You have more control, you have more, of your own sense of who you are, but you'll have a more niche fan base. I think that you could still have millions and millions of people, looking for you and, wanting to talk to you. Even me having, a very short experience in this, 10 years ago, I still have people, trying to email me or say something to me about it. And, so I think, when someone's a fan of you, they just never really quit being a fan of you unless you do something
Sure.
that would offend them, I guess.
Sure. Sure. So, one thing, so after I watched that documentary, I saw the epilogues, and I started Googling the people who were in the film to see if anyone would talk to me about it. And I can't, when I found you, I don't remember what I put in to locate you, but I came across a Twitter profile, and on that it put a link to an OnlyFans account, and my impression was like, oh, like you went from the documentary saying that you dropped out, and then there's sort of this social media side of things. Can you just tell me a little bit about why that page is there and how that fits into your life right now?
Yeah, so well, like with obviously everything I've explained, I never really thought that a woman doing something, within her own right, her own choice was a bad thing. And a woman in the industry or on OnlyFans, no difference to me. You do whatever makes you feel good. I think that at a certain point, I was being puppeted and I was being, made to be something. But to be clear, that's always, been my 100% opinion about that. But for me, that also was the same thing. I was also the person who would, who could choose what I wanted. And when everything took a massive turn for me and I had to start working, minimum wage again and having to like really like try and do things, to try to work hard again. The pandemic happened and 2020 was insane, but that was like the beginning of everything online OnlyFans. I'm witnessing like woman after woman like do this. It's becoming more normalized. This is like, okay, interesting. And I was like, well, I was already in this place once. I have like, I think there's people out there who still like are interested in seeing what I have going on, and at least I'm safe and I'm in control and I am my own person and I'm in a loving relationship and I'm good. So when I experimented with this, and it turned out that a lot of people were still wondering, what happened to me, and that it made me extremely good passive income. It was just something that I couldn't really turn down, as seeing like that I'm very much fueled by being able to like support myself and continue to have like money coming in. That was just insane how quickly it could go from like zero to like working so hard every day to like getting to choose, like having a choice as to then venture off into things that really interest me, like yoga, spirituality, all of these things. I wouldn't have had the choice to do that had I not gotten just one bit of money that I could like hold on to and figure my life out with. So that's why I think that those things are beautiful. And I think that women should be less ostracized for them.
OnlyFans, since you are in control, like it eliminates that consent problem that existed in, I mean, maybe not, it's not the consent problem, because these sort of abuse porn things where I guess we're done technically with consent,
Yeah.
but it certainly lets you frame whatever you want, and it feels like it's a also I like cutting out the middleman in things
Yeah.
in general. I'm glad I don't work for Wired, because there's like all
Yeah.
these like intermediaries. So I see that
Yeah.
as personally as a better turn for the industry, because it's I assume, actually I don't know how OnlyFans channels actually work, but I would assume that it's now going to be creator run, which and that means you have more control over that ultimate image that comes out.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
have you been in touch, or do you keep in touch with any of the other people from that documentary, and do you know where they are now?
Yeah, the thing about that was that I was only with those girls for quite a short amount of time, compared to the whole length and span of time that I was like doing anything with this. So for like the brief moments that I knew them, we were really good friends, but when people split and go their separate ways and usually have, quite an interesting trajectory after something like that, we didn't really keep in contact. It wasn't the social media age that it is now, where like we were all like connected no matter what. It was very much so like personally, like you had your own life, your own path. You would meet people in cross sections, and then whether you saw them again after that, like it was kind of normalized, like not to. But then occasionally, like one or two would reach out, like one or two would find your Facebook and like you'd say like, "Oh, how are you?" Like, this has only happened once or twice. The only person like I've really like seen or gotten in contact with was my friend Carter, but she wasn't in the documentary. I met her, later on, and she's doing awesome now. So it's really cool to be able to see like the other side of what was possible. And it didn't have to just go the one way.
after this came out, I reached out to you, and I also reached out to Rashida Jones. I reached out to the two directors,
Yeah.
and funnily enough, one of the directors, the one with the dark hair, I actually went to college with her. I didn't know her at college,
No,
but we have
you're
like a
kidding.
ton. We have a ton of friends in common on Facebook. I was like, whoa, okay,
Wow.
maybe you'll talk to me. She
Wow.
didn't respond to my
Wow.
emails, or to my
I
messages.
wouldn't think so. Yeah.
Why do you think that that crew doesn't want to talk about this documentary? What's your impression of that?
Well, I think that they would have to like admit fault probably for what they did, especially for like the ways that they blurred the lines, really operated in a gray area, and really pretended to care. They did a really good job at pretending to be there for you, and it seemed like they really wanted you to, and it sounds so insane and so naive for me to even say now, really wanted you to like succeed in the things like that you wanted to do and all of this stuff, and like having two like quite docile women like standing behind the camera, like they were easy to trust. So I know that there were powers at play beyond them. I know that they are like, it's kind of like a don't shoot the messenger type of thing, but like they're the ones who were in it with me. They're the only ones that I can really like visualize when I think of like what happened and who was responsible for it. And when I did, a couple years back, have the epiphany about it, and I tweeted like, because I was gonna tell this story myself eventually. I was just gonna sit on a camera and tell my story, but I was like, it'll come up when it does. I tweeted about it. I put out like, hey, so I just had an epiphany about this whole thing that happened to me. Like, who would want to hear about that? Send me some questions in my email if you do. And I just had hundreds of questions in my email, so many people wanting to hear about it. And then them hitting me up for the first time in years, being like, hi, like, can we chat? And I'm like, oh, that's really interesting because you did not even once try and get in contact with me in between. Maybe once, I'll give that to them. But like, um, the moment that I started even saying like, "Oh, I have my opinion about this," all of a sudden they were somehow trying to talk to me again, and I didn't, accept the invitation to speak on it because I figured like I should probably tell my story first so they don't dupe me again. But so yeah, I don't know. I can't like fully fault them. I know that this was part of their job, but just like everything was part of my job, and those other things like could have, like I could have had more choice in the end of it all.
From a journalist perspective, when a story gets initiated, it starts out as a pitch, which goes to an editor, and then you and the editor talk about it, and then maybe there's other lawyers and other people involved, and all of that happens before the actual interviews occur. So there's already a structure that has been imposed, and sometimes that structure is dynamic, and sometimes the structure is rigid, and you sort of have to, your story has to adhere to what has been created. So I can understand how, there's some difficult lines that as those documentary filmmakers, they have to try. And I would say that I think the documentary I do feel like they tried to be fair on many points, but at the, and they showed you as real people. But there was this feeling that all, my takeaway at the end of this was like, the porn industry is violent, it's exploitative. These I did think that the actresses had, were taken advantage of, but I also saw that they got something out of it as well. I would say that I had a more conflicted feeling at the end than I did this is a right-wing agenda founded by the Heritage Foundation and et cetera, et cetera. So I don't want to just blast the filmmakers, but it does seem that giving you an outlet, and it's really, I'm so psyched that you're talking to me now to process this again, is great. It's awesome to hear where you're coming from. And when you think about porn, it's it's a camera within a camera, right? You're shooting your scene. then you're also having like a reality show around you. And then there's like another Netflix agenda that's on top of that. I don't know what to make of that. That wasn't even a question. All right, here's a question. Here's the question. This is an industry. There are producers and there are consumers of it. There's obviously demand. There is supply. What does it mean to be an ethical porn consumer in this world? I mean, we had this whole movement that's coming out of the right. It's called like the no fap movement. There's these, like Andrew Huberman says, you should never look at porn because it, you know, messes your dopamine levels. And there's a very like strong, usually from the right, but also from the left, saying that porn is bad, and yet the industry is enormous, and obviously people are going to be looking at it. So from your perspective, what does it mean to be an ethical porn consumer?
Well, I would say it's the same as being an ethical internet consumer, an ethical phone consumer, an ethical media consumer. It's basically the same thing. Like, if if you feel like engaging with this at all, like you need to make clear and concise boundaries as to what you believe is real, what you think that is acceptable in real relationships and real, like, you know, sexual encounters, what you like, having a real sense of like who you are before you start assigning anything to yourself here. Because like, same with social media, like you can come to this like as, you know, a 12-year-old and have no sense of who you are and have everything fed to you, and that's what you become, that's what you begin to believe. So if you know, are naive and new to the like the world of all of this, and like you maybe like this is like your first experiences with like even sexual activity at all, then like that it can be really irresponsible, you know, to go in there and just consume. Anything that you see becomes normalized, and a lot of what you see is not great, because of just how humans exist in this world. Like there is a lot of, you know, hedonism qualities to humans that like I don't think we'll ever necessarily get rid of, but it comes from just being conscious and like extremely aware of yourself, and to understand like, who am I harming through what I'm doing? Same with like even plastic bottles, or, you know, like it's the same thing. Like, are you contributing to yourself and your society and the people around you, or are you not? So you can do this maybe, you know, for fun or whatever you see it for, but when it starts to rule your mind, rule your personality, change like the way that you would think about things usually, or start to influence you in a negative way, where we're talking addiction, because I think that's a huge part, not only phone addiction, but now I see posts every day about like people on this thing, it's called deciding to do better, and like they're like, how do I quit porn, like how do I quit watching porn, like how do I do this? It's the same thing. People are addicted to TikTok. It's just like we have to just come back to our centers as a society in general. So I think that it's like not surprising that, you know, at the same rate that like we're all becoming addicted to the internet, to media, to whatever, that we're also all equally getting addicted to porn. But there's even deeper things going on, you know, with the porn side of it, because this has been in our psyche and in who we are as humans, you know, forever. So, and it's a little bit more dangerous because you can inflict a lot more harm on people when it comes to sexuality and things of that nature. So, I would say just be conscious in anything that you do, and maybe look a little bit deeper than just your own pleasure seeking mechanisms, you know, in all
Thank you
things.
for keeping this video, you know, monetizable, by your very careful word choice. Um, uh, so you you know, after this all came out, you know, before we had this discussion, we had a little off-air discussion while we were doing video, you know,
Mhm.
managing the cameras to work right. And one of the things you mentioned was that you know, your Twitter handle had been hacked, and you have all these impersonators out there.
Oh
I
yeah.
don't, you know, you have this sort of like weird internet stuff, scammy stuff that's going on to you. And even when I watched the follow-up TV show, I tried to look up one of the women who was depicted in it, and her Twitter handle had obviously been hacked. It was like, buy this cryptocurrency. I'm like, that's not real.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah.
the question that I have is, one, what has happened to you from like reactions from the public to you after this? And would you rather, to part of you, this all stayed private, or are you okay with the public notoriety, or somewhere in between? Like, where are we now with your public persona?
Well, I think that I definitely like put myself into a hole because the onslaught of what came from Netflix, ABC, big publications like having my face, having my name, like, that was intense. And I knew nothing else but to like completely go in the opposite direction, like basically hide, like, and do my best to stay out of any like spotlight. Anytime anyone would mention like this other name to me that I once went by when I was 18, I'm like, I don't even know who you're talking about anymore. That is not me. I just didn't want anything to do with it. All it did was bring up, like something dumb that I either said or did when I was 18, or something bad that someone did to me when I was 18. So I just didn't really feel like engaging with it at all for a long time. Then I started thinking about it more, and I was like, oh, like this is actually like a really intense and insane story. Like, I don't think that it's necessarily for me to never speak about. But I needed to be able to do it when I, was mentally prepared for it. And even like getting your email and like setting this up and, feeling like the fear of like, oh my God, people are gonna like perceive me again. Like, I don't know if I necessarily want that. Like, I just, it's such a weird thing in your head. Like, is this for the greater good, or am I just, beating a dead horse? But for me, I'm more okay. I have to like be who I am always. And if I can ever have a platform to speak about that, or what happened to me, or if I could like help anybody with something that like they're maybe questioning or going through, because this is not like the end of the road for young girls and women who are, trying to find a way in the world. I think that talking about it is always better than not talking about it, especially being raised like Catholic. You're so used to just like silence, like, like let's pretend nothing bad ever happens. But to me, I'd rather not continue on with things of that nature. So I think for me, I'll continue to talk about it. If someone wants to speak to me about it in a civilized way, then I'll tell them my story. I think that, some of the craziest, and intense things that happen to you in your life are meant to be for wisdom, and wisdom is nothing unless you can tell it as a story. So, for me, in the direction that I'm going in my life, and I'm getting older, I mean, I'm really about to be 30. So it's crazy to, have had such an insane thing happen, when I was really young, and then slowly year after year like open up a new facet of it, and a new like avenue about like what it meant and like how it changed the trajectory of my life. um I think even in another 10 years I'll have a completely different opinion of it, or maybe like a deeper opinion of it. But I don't know, I think that it's always better to get your own words out than to not.
Yeah, I mean, that's an astute point to when you said that, this all happened when you were 18. Like especially the most public face of this was happened when you were
Mhm.
18. It was someone else's vision, and
Yeah.
now it's frozen in amber with someone
Yep.
else's frame on it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that is, yeah, that's, one of the things I think this was something that Mrs. Matisse said, but it could have been some other critic. It was like you were exploited twice, right? There was the industry that had its agenda, but you also had this agenda
Yeah.
of Netflix, and both people
Yeah.
were making money off of you. Like, that a
Yeah.
Netflix budget is typically at least $1 million an episode, and probably more since they had Rashida Jones on it.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's layers and layers and layers, and even if they're saying porn is bad, right? Even if they're saying, oh, porn is so bad and these women need to get out of it, they're still selling the thumbnail Hot Girls Wanted with this like sort of alluring thumbnail. And they're still like, they're still
With
very
me
much.
in my room at my house. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, they were asking me to take the picture of myself on my bed, like in my room. And I was like, oh, this feels like oddly weird. Because it was two women, like, no, pose a little bit more, sexy. I'm like, wait, what? But that's just ironic to me.
This is fascinating. So let's just dig into that just moment for a second. So we have these two documentarians who probably have like sort of an anti-porn agenda, right? And they know they want a thumbnail that's going to get the clicks to pull them in. And they say to you, they actually sort of recreate the same scene that they're critiquing, so that they can get attention that they know works.
Yep. Yeah. And seriously, it was like, make it darker, make it look more like look down, look away, like look sadder, like it was very like, do this. And I was like, oh, cool. Like, I'm going to have one of my pictures on Netflix. Like, that's the way that I was thinking about it, but they got me in a sweet spot. They really knew how to like play into like what I wanted to be and what I saw myself as. And then really showed me like who I really was to them. Because of course, they didn't mention Rashida Jones in the beginning of anything. Like they didn't tell us how big or how nationwide any of this would be. But that's how they got the honesty out of you. That's how they like, I was like, oh my God, these guys are going to go like rewind these tapes and like splice this together. Like this is 1992. Like, but they just, no, it was a completely different thing than what they were presenting it to be. And had I known that, I probably would have still participated because that's just the opportunist in me, but maybe I would have thought a little bit more about it. I wouldn't have like villainized like the one thing that was like leading me to the path of all these other things that I wanted to do.
Or maybe they would have just done the same thing that everyone else that the recruiters did and just found a different girl who was less
yeah,
willing. Like if you had stood up and
of
said,
course.
no, this isn't right for me, they'd be like, cool,
Yeah.
I'll go over to
Yeah.
this
It was
other lady.
actually the best thing that they could do because they knew already that we were girls who would say yes. They knew that we were girls who would, do something if someone convincing enough was, giving us the right, lines. And everything in me was, thinking that I was doing things for the right cause. And I wanted to make that abundantly clear. Like, I am going to stand up for the right cause, but like, whose right cause? Like I I don't
And
know,
what does
but
an
I know now.
18-year-old really know about a
Yeah.
right cause anyway? Like,
No, absolutely not. Like not at all. I had no clue, no idea. Not even I had one side of what I knew. And through the last 10 years it's just been like finding new sides and new sides and new sides to what I did and why it led me to where I am now. And how it will continue to. I definitely needed it for like credibility and whatever for all of my future things that I'm going to do. So I definitely don't regret it for a minute.
I really appreciate you sitting down and talk with me and like giving, and having a long and sort of in-depth conversation about this. Usually at this point in the podcast is where someone says, where do they find out more about you? But my question for you now is twofold. Do you want people to find out more about you? And if
I think that's so funny. Continue. Sorry. Let me have you finish your question. Okay. Um, I think that if they're meant to, they will. Like I know that I have a very, direct and I don't know, dignified way of like being in the world. And I know that, the people who do come across me are supposed to and if our paths cross, yay. And now I don't want to like send and direct people to any like website or like a podcast that I'm creating or anything like that. But I think that, if anyone is like, curious about me or whatever, what have you, do your own research. Like you'll find me some way or another. Like I live in my little city and I teach yoga and I do Reiki, and I'm living in my little spiritual place right now, and I just I know that eventually, like when I expand beyond that, then this will serve its purpose for me too. But in general, I think if anyone else wants to digest or go through this conversation and like get more answers for themselves, if they're curious, they can just email me their questions or whatever. But I'm definitely not shutting off everybody and saying like, don't ever be interested in anything that I have to say ever again. But also, I have no agenda
Do
for
you
this,
want
and I
me to
just wanted
leave a way for people to get in touch with you, or should we leave that to the whims of the universe?
I would love to say the whims of the universe, but if they're interested, where I do still do photography, you can find me on my real Instagram, and like I do want to say, like any Twitter that's out there that is active is not me. My real Instagram, who is me, is just LILRACHPROD. So it's like Lil Rach Productions, but just prod at the end. So I do take pictures. Yeah,
If
perfect.
people will their way to there, that's great. And if they don't, they don't. Cool.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. That's the point that I wanted to get across. Because really, like,
And
I don't know if all of it's for me.
I haven't looked at it, but I'm assuming that it's not like porn. It's like your life, right? It's like not.
Yes. No.
Yeah.
No, there's nothing on there. There's no like promotion of porn. There's nothing that I would like repost or do that brings that facet of my life like back to the forefront of what I'm doing. I'm very far down the line now from that. Even from like 2020, like I'm still even pushing it further and further out of my life. But I still am, I have a social media presence, and I do post my photography. I'll, occasionally will come on there. I, recently had like my first art show in a really long time. So like if you're interested in art, if you're interested in spirituality, like then maybe, you can find something for yourself there. But if you're coming and looking for like porn and nakedness, like you probably won't find it.
I love that. That's the weirdest like promotional take at the end of a podcast I've ever come across. Like, do come, but don't come only if you're not a thirsty dude. I love it. I
Yes.
love it.
Yeah.
And that's perfect. The link will be in the
Thank,
description, but be careful.
thank you.
You're not necessarily allowed to click on that if you have the wrong intentions. But then again, if you made it all the way to the end of this podcast, you're probably not that sort of person anyway. So
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. If you, that's a good point. If you've made it to this point, then go ahead, find me. I appreciate you. You're probably really nice and caring, and thanks for listening.
all right. Well, thanks so much for being here. This was Scott Carney Investigates from PokeyBear LLC in Denver, Colorado. And thanks so much for being. Thank you so much to all of my supporters on Patreon and on Substack who make this work possible. If you want early access and to get your name on the honor roll, please check out those links down below. And it just means the world to me that you're here. From PokeyBear LLC in Denver, Colorado, this was Scott Carney Investigates.